start by welcoming everyone to our webinar. This webinar hosted by Food for Sustainability and Grow, where we will be delving into a critical topic of functional biodiversity. And this time we will be focusing on indicators and tools for monitoring and assessing biodiversity progress. Today, we are privileged to have three distinguished speakers with us. Gonçalo Duarte, a product manager for predatory insects at Koppert. Also, Manuel Vicente, a consultant for sustainability at Quality Advisor, and especially focusing on the agri-food sector. And last but certainly not least, Rui Figueira, an assistant professor at the Instituto Superior de Agronomia, or as we all know, ISA here in Portugal. And a couple of words about our topic. So functional biodiversity, as we all know, plays a pivotal role in maintaining ecosystem health and resilience, especially in agriculture systems. Monitoring tools are essential for assessing the effectiveness of biodiversity conservation efforts. These tools help us track changes in species diversity, ecosystem functions, and the overall health of ecosystems. Throughout this webinar, we'll explore the importance of functional biodiversity, discuss biodiversity indicators, and delve into various monitoring tools available to assess and enhance biodiversity conservation efforts. So let's welcome our esteemed speakers and embark in this enlightening journey all together. Thank you so much. I will just need a couple of minutes to tell you the house rules. Probably by now you know by heart the house rules, but to remind you that our webinars are recorded. So if you're not comfortable with the recording, please keep here with us, but just turn your cameras off. Questions also are very welcome. You know that we will use Slido or the chat for this purpose. If you're more comfortable with the chat, please, we are attentive to the chat, so it's absolutely fine. So we will address the questions after each presentation, but you know, I need to ensure that this webinar runs only for 1.5 hours. So I'll try to manage all your questions, and I'm sure that our speakers can continue our conversation with you, even if we need to progress. So as we all start, we like to start with a little warm-up, right? And we do this by using Slido, correct? So I invite you all to jump on Slido. So if you just open a tab in your browser and you kindly type www.slido.com, okay? In the hashtag box, you insert F4S Academy. You should be able, in the Tools tab, to see what the team has prepared for us, okay? These questions, you know, relate to what's the topic that we'll be discussing, and they can serve us as a warm-up. Rita, are we ready for the first question?
Sure.
It's just because I cannot see. Okay. So we have done a little bit of research about the company Koppert. So the question is, in 1964, a cucumber grower named Jan Koppert, he found a new solution, actually an innovative approach to deal with pest and disease control. Do you know what this innovative approach was? Was it because he introduced electromagnetic waves to prevent and combat spider mites? Or was it because he introduced the Phytoselium persimilis mite to combat the spider mites? Or was it because he implemented natural food-based traps to capture and control the spider mites in his cucumber fields? What is your view on this, and actually we can. So basically, this innovation, what is now a huge and successful company, started with a grower that was finding the way to combat pests and diseases at the time were becoming less and less efficient. So we find out a natural solution, and that he was so successful that this turned into a commercial and viable company that he set on his own, but also he started to sell it to his fellow growers. Okay, so I think you're absolutely right. So he looked at the Phytoselius persimilis mite. He found that this was a natural enemy to combat the spider mite, and from there, Jan Koppert founded this company that's still now in place today, and we have here Gonçalo to tell us a little bit more about its operations. Thank you so much. Great, nice to see you. That everyone is really on top of things. So next question, Rita, can we move to the next question? So we heard a lot about ESG. Do you actually know what ESG stands for? And we have here three options: environmental, social, and governance; economic, social, and governance; environment, sustainability, and governance. So let's vote. And the ESG are, in fact, a set of practices, policies, procedures, metrics that organizations implement to limit the negative impact or enhance the positive impact on, and do we have accounting? So we have 8 people already answer to us, and well, economics, it would be difficult, right? We have so many reporting on economics, and it's indeed about environment, social, and governance policies to ensure that they are being reduced in terms of their negative impact or actually enhanced. Thank you so much. Well done. Fantastic. Always knowledge, our participants. It's great to have you here. So, and now a question that Rui Figueira is probably very knowledgeable about. So, which of these following statements accurately summarize the role of birds and trees in providing ecosystem service in agricultural landscapes? So, are we talking about the birds that primarily contribute to pest control, even if they have minimal presence of trees? Is it about trees that serve mainly as the shelter for birds, and where there is some evidence about their contributions to ecosystem regulations? Or is it about the combination of birds and trees that contribute to ecosystem services, such as pest control, ecosystem regulation, especially in landscapes where trees are present? And indeed, as we've been talking throughout these webinars, integrating natural-based solution like the ones that promote biodiversity, it's already something that it's important for everyone and for farmers, definitely. And you can see that any of them have a positive effect. But where do you place your bets? Okay, again, very well. Thank you so much. It's indeed about birds and trees contributing to ecosystem service, such as pest control and ecosystem regulation. And this is especially true where the landscape promotes trees. And I'm pretty sure that Rui will shed some more light on this. So thank you so much for taking part. I'm now going to call Gonçalo to the floor, and while Gonçalo shares his presentation, I'm going to quickly introduce you to Gonçalo. So Gonçalo is the agriculture engineer specialized in crop protection by Instituto Superior de Agronomia. He started his professional activity in horticulture, in the production of vegetables and aromatic herbs in both conventional and organic systems. In 2015, he has joined Koppert as a technical advisor and is currently holds the position of Global Product Manager for Predatory Insects. Gonçalo is also interested in entomology and adjacent areas like biological control, agroecology, and conservation. Gonçalo, thank you so much for being here, and it will be a pleasure to hear your presentation.
Pleasure is mine. I was going to present what Jan Koppert has done in the past, but it was already very well explained. So we'll just go. I'll try to be brief because there is a lot of things to basically tell you about what Koppert is doing at the moment. But also, I'm taking or seizing the opportunity to be here in a double capacity because I'm also a researcher. And I've been doing exactly this, applying functional biodiversity from nature to farmers and back to nature. And this is also what Koppert is doing. So I will start my presentation. Did you hear me or?
Yeah. I can hear you. Thank you.
Yeah, because this is not working. Ah, okay. So yeah, very briefly, Koppert is indeed still a family company owned by the family Koppert. It's a Dutch family. It was started by Jan Koppert, as we already heard. These days, we are currently in the third generation of the family, and we have moved into way more than what we started with. So we started with that predatory mite that we heard about that really changed how we control spider mites in farming. And these days, we're doing a lot more things. So we are currently working on three main areas in agriculture, which is pollination. Koppert has pollinating flies and bumblebees. Of course, biological control, which is still the main area of our work, and soil health. Basically, we have entomopathogenic nematodes, we have beneficial fungi, a lot of things that we are developing for the health of crops. This started in 1967. As you can imagine, the company has been growing dramatically in the past few years. Every year, I can say we launch a different type of product. A product for us can be either a species or a presentation, a way of how to release an insect or a mite. And this is just a brief sample of what we currently have. And we're always under developing things and providing new resources to farmers. Now, the key message here that I would like to bring today to you all is to really connect our activity to what the main topic of today, which is functional biodiversity. We generally tend to define functional biodiversity within agriculture as the biodiversity that actually provides a service to the grower. We can say that all biodiversity in the end provides a service, but in the practical sense, there are species that contribute more directly to the results of agricultural production. In this case, it all starts with nature. Some people ask if companies like Koppert are genetically modifying species or selecting species, and that's not being done. So what's being done is that we have a pest or an imbalance in nature. Our researchers then need to identify the best candidate species that are their natural enemies. So, and then we have to do a lot of research. We have to know a lot of different things, which I'll show you next. By the way, this is the mite we were talking about, Phytocephus persimilis, which is still the #1 natural enemy for spider mites all over the globe, and it's widely used. It's very effective. So in terms of research and development, after we have identified a candidate biological control agent, there are a number of things we need to know. We need to know its biology in terms of What species can it feed on? How well it can control the pest? Is there a possibility for mass production? And also there are issues with regulations, with laws. Sometimes you cannot introduce every species everywhere, and that's a very good idea. And there's also the issue with distribution, logistics. Sometimes we can do all of the things of the above, but then we have a problem because the species does not travel well, logistics is complicated, so it also is it's a bottleneck for us. I can give you an example from my PhD, which I was basically doing this. We identified a very interesting insect in Portugal for the tomato production, a generalist predator. And in the end, we kind of found out that even though it's very interesting, we cannot mass produce it, at least not in an economic viable way. So that will also bring us to another question that is very interesting for today, which is, okay, what do we do then when we do not have commercial enemies? This is just to give you an example of the ongoing developments. This is just 4 examples of products that were launched within the last 12 months. Some of them were already present. At your left, you have a mirid bug called Macrolophus. It's very widely used in horticultural crops. It's a generalist predator that can feed on most pests. In the central two, you have 2 hoverflies, also native from our country in the Mediterranean region. And the last one, which is our most recent development, is a ladybug, which is specialized on hard-scale insects that infest citrus, olives, a number of crops. But like I was saying, sometimes you cannot produce natural enemies, and this is another key moment for our topic of today of functional biodiversity. What we have here is a picture of a very big problem in apple production, which is the woolly apple aphid. This species produces a lot of waxy secretions, as you can see here, and it only has one natural enemy, which is this wasp. The very tiny wasp called Aphelinus mali. It's the species that is original from North America. It was introduced all over the world to control the pest. But the thing is, it's so good, it's so specific, it can only parasitize that host. So mass production is really virtually impossible. So in these cases, we need to work differently. We know that we cannot sell solutions, we cannot provide commercial viable solutions to growers. Then we need to promote functional biodiversity differently, and I'm sure you've all heard about this. Which is a term we often agronomists call conservation biological control, which is nothing else but first, reduce or limit the use of pesticides. And after that, I would even argue if it's after that or before, we need to promote or enhance the quality of habitats within the farming area. And this we can do by generally making the system more complex. We know that these days we have very simplistic environments, like you have with row crops like vineyards, like apples, like almonds. It's really not a very interesting habitat for what we want or need to have in terms of biodiversity. And there is a difference between what we see in the left and the right with a more complex landscape. So in essence, we need to try to make the system more complex, and that means providing different resources, which is for insects mostly nectar and pollen, because most predatory insects also need to feed on nectar for energy and pollen for protein for building up their reproductive capacity. We also need to provide them with alternative prey or host, which is very important in the case of some natural enemies, and of course physical refuge, because they need places to be safe from the environment, to hibernate, to be close to the production site. So in the picture, basically you have the example of an apple orchard, and in one hedge you have a species that will produce a flower resource, and in another a hedge that will produce an alternative prey resource. In this case can be an aphid that is not a problem to the crop, and I will show you some examples now. Like I said, we need to make the system more complex, provide more species, provide more interconnection with species so that we have a higher number and some redundancy in the system in case a particular species of natural enemy is not doing so well. We have a backup on other different species that can support our system. This is something we need to consider. We generally think about, when we think about a pest, we tend to think about one type of enemy, but we really need to think about a complex of enemies that will help us control our pest. This is particularly important in open field crops, where to rely only on commercial natural enemies may not be enough. So the farmer needs to know this. He needs to know that he needs to have a complex of predators or natural enemies like parasitoids. This is just a slide to show you that we usually recognize the ones from above, which are the adult stage of predators or natural enemies. But few people or specialized people tend to know also that these ugly ones from the below row are also the ones that contribute the most. These are the larval stages of these predators, and they are usually the ones that do most of the job. Also, the natural enemies of spider mites in general are also mites, predatory mites. Again, here you see in the movie is Parsimillis, our star mite, and you can see that it attacks mites almost as big as itself. So it's a very voracious predator. It's also a specialist, which means it feeds on spider mites, and if they are depleted, it will either starve or feed on its own species. So it's really a very specific tool, and it's a very good thing to use when you know what you need to control. It's like a very precise tool. But this is the type of thing, and another example of things you cannot buy, you cannot put into the system unless you protect it and enhance it. These are other types of natural enemies of mites that will naturally appear in the system or the crop whenever we are not very heavy on chemical use. And of course, this provides for a much more sustainable and resilient system because you have a diversity of species feeding on the same prey. Other generalists are the anthocorid bugs, which are also very versatile in terms of what they eat. This kind is Aureus, is a species widely used on a great number of crops for thrips control, but they will also feed on other things like pollen, as you see on the left. So flower resources are key. Of course, we cannot forget about vertebrates. We tend to think a lot about insects in my situation, but birds are very important for the control of caterpillars. Also, bats are very important to control adult moths. And we need to show the growers that there is great value in promoting this type of biodiversity as well in their production systems. And this is just a brief summary of examples of how we can do this. I will show you just a brief number of species that we are currently advising growers to put in their systems to increase functional biodiversity. The first one is Sambucus. It's a native species in our country. It produces an abundance of flower in spring. It's a very good resource for many insects, as you can see. And a key element for me is that Sambucus has a specific aphid that will only feed on this tree, but itself is preyed upon by a number of natural enemies. So this can be used as a bank of natural enemies for other crops without risk of these aphids attacking crops. Another plant that is very interesting is Viburnum. It also produces a lot of flower very early in the year. It's very attractive to some natural enemies, like you see here, hoverfly, which are also predators of aphids. Another hoverfly. Another species, Nerium, which is a native to the Mediterranean as well, and does also have a specific aphid, which only feeds on this plant. With a particular situation, this plant is very toxic, and these aphids are toxic to most natural enemies. Most ladybugs cannot feed on this aphid, but there is one species that can, which is the species in the photo. It's called Hypodamia. It has evolved to be able to feed on, to tolerate the toxins. And this means that whenever we use nerium, we are also selecting for the presence of hypodamia. It will stay on the neriums until there's food, but when the aphid population is depleted, they will just go wherever other aphids are, which is also very good for the grower. This is hypodamia. Another species that we use, and this is a very practical example for you to see, is Lobularia maritima. It's also a native of our country and region. Usually it tends to grow close to the ocean, but since it's a very tolerant species to many conditions, we use it a lot in many farming systems. In this case, you can see this is a blueberry production, and we use it as a banker plant for many natural enemies. It produces a lot of nectar and pollen. It's very attractive, and we have many proofs that this will increase biodiversity in a positive way for production. You can see a very small detail of the flower, and tiny parasitoids go into there to feed on nectar, and then they fly around to parasitize pests. And the final example is something we generally tend to use as food, but sometimes we also use as a banker plant for natural enemies, which is fava beans. They also have a specific aphid, and you can just produce a lot of natural enemies. In this picture, you can see the eggs of ladybugs. Hoverflies will go in there, more eggs of ladybugs. This is also a larvae of a ladybug that feeds on the colony. You can see that. And it's just a very good source of natural enemies when you have problems with aphids. This is also an example that we don't always have to introduce things to the system. Oftentimes we need to know what's already there because there's already good things, and key is just not to destroy it. So here you see a plant that is very common in agricultural systems. And this has a colony of aphids, also specific. This is Rumex, which has a specific aphid as well. And if you look closely, there are already larvae of hoverflies there. Now, usually growers would basically use some herbicide or just mow this down to ground, and they would not know what they were losing. And there's actually no risk. This aphid is not a problem to the crop and is serving as a bank to natural enemies that we really want. This was what I had to give you today. I think that's all. If you have questions later, I think.
Gonçalo, thank you so much. It was really a very beautiful presentation and a very clear presentation. Thank you so much. It's so beautiful always to see nature in action, and thanks for pronouncing so well that important might that started it all. Let's wait for questions from our audience, but in the meanwhile, I think you touched several points that are quite challenging to make use of biological pest control, natural pest control, more challenging. One of them is that we really need, I suppose that we need to understand this complex system, but not only that, we also need to understand the endophyclimatic conditions and the specific conditions to ensure that the species survive, they are well adapted, and they resist. How do you do this in practice? Do you work with farmers? Do you visit? Do you advise before you propose a solution?
Yes, so what we have is we have teams in the field, and they basically visit the growers and they advise them on what to do. Just to be clear, I would say next to 100% of the species that we have or we use, for instance, in Portugal, are already native species, so they are adapted to most of our conditions. Of course, some species do better inside greenhouses. Some other species do prefer open field situations. We have to adapt, but that's that type of knowledge that is behind all of this. This is something that we need to train growers all the time. We need to provide them with knowledge. The good thing is that they are loving this, and that we can see every day that farmers are changing their practices. They are switching to biological control. And our problem today is not so much on people taking up this type of solutions and practices, but more on we are reaching very difficult to control pests, like leafhoppers are a very big problem, and we do not yet have a solution. So they know biological control works, but they want it for everything, which at the moment is still not a very good option.
Okay, that's interesting. Well, I think from our webinars, we have this feeling that farmers, they really appreciate to work with biodiversity, put biodiversity at their service. I think that's not, it's part of the human nature. We like biodiversity. We like to see, animals and insects in the fields. That's really a pleasure. But of course, there's a lot of knowledge behind it to know how to work it and to promote and enhance the good ones, and not kill but control and manage the
That's
at least
key.
to us, to our advantage, the not so good one. Gonçalo, I think you touched on in your presentation about your kind of business model. So could you detail again how you work with biodiversity? So do you create the animals in the lab and then you release them, or do you actually go to the field and propose measures to enhance the biodiversity that is already there and is probably autochthonous, or probably the more adapted to the region?
Okay, so we do a bit of both. So the business model of Koppert is actually to mass produce natural enemies. We have factories that produce insects and mites in the millions in different continents of the world. And that's our most important activity. But like I was saying, many times that's not enough. We often go to open field crops where we can release one or two natural enemies that are very, very effective against a particular pest. But then you have the rest of pests that cannot be currently controlled because we do not have a solution yet. And for that, we advise growers on strategies of how to enhance their biodiversity in their own farm. We advise on the species they need to plant. And we also advise on how to measure, how to count, how to make the monitoring of those systems in order for him to be sure that everything is at least reaching a balance. Like you said, we never want to eradicate anything. That's a very wrong line of thought. We want to put populations below a level that is a problem for us. And this is sometimes very hard to change in the mind of a grower.
Yes, and when we interfere with this complex web and this system, we will then find out some collateral effects that sometimes we then regret. But that's part of knowledge and growing. Gonçalo, we have a question here from our audience, and the question is, from your presentation, conservation biological control sounds like a wonderful idea. Why is it not used more often? And are there any arguments against it? What are the downsides?
Yes, the good thing is I'm seeing more uptake, even in Portugal, which was the country that usually growers would really not want to do this at the first time. But the uptake is there, and the main arguments against this are still, why am I going to lose a part of my surface to plant things that will not produce fruits or vegetables, that don't have an economic return, which is also a bit short-sighted, because oftentimes it's our job to show them that this is not wasting money. This is actually very beneficial, not only economically, but also you can consider another type of what are the types of benefits. But usually the biggest problem is they do not want to have the work of managing this type of infrastructures. The good thing is that the market itself is already pressing farmers to do it. So, and then when they start doing it, they see the benefits and they understand.
Okay, good. Gonçalo, can you just detail what does that management involve here? What does it require to manage this small ecosystem?
Yeah, so there are many different things. Like, for instance, they can start with sowing different crops or different species in their orchard or field or whatever. They need to choose the right seeds. They need to have the actual operation of seeding those plants. And there's also when you install, for instance, a hedge, some of those hedges will need some pruning or some maintenance to keep them in the proper size and dimensions. These type of operations are usually the grower usually feels a bit afraid of it because it's going to waste some money, and he doesn't have yet the idea of the value he's getting out of these structures. So this is usually where it
Things
lies.
get tricky. So we need a lot of demonstration. We need a lot of field days to really demonstrate that this can be not as tricky as it sounds. But I think one understands that this can seem a bit daunting at first, trying to manage something that you don't control, nature. So Gonçalo, just one final questions. Do you have any long-term financial studies comparing the use of beneficial insects versus using pesticides, preferably in greenhouses?
Yes, in greenhouses, it's very, very easy to prove that the grower will save money compared to pesticides, because oftentimes they will release just a few insects or very few times. And if he has a balanced system, he doesn't need to treat the crop as often. Whereas when you're based in a system of chemicals, you need to treat very often because pests are resistant. You cannot build up a natural enemy population. So we have that already proved.
Okay, good. Thank you, Gonçalo. Gonçalo, we need to move on. We still have two interesting presentations, but please stay with us. I still have a question for you at the end. So
Okay.
I now call Manuel Vicente to the floor. Manuel, let me introduce you, Manuel. Manuel holds a double degree in business administration and tourism from Valencia University. Is a consultant in the area of sustainability at Quality Advisor for both agri-food, packaging, and the tourism sector. Some of the certifications Manuel works regularly are the FS so the Forest Stewardship Council, the PEFC, so the Program for the Endorsement of Forest Certification, and the ISO. All these are standards. Also, carbon footprint, water footprint, and BiodiversityGrow, which we will hear more, as well as the ESG sustainable reports based on the GRI methodology and zero waste. It also carries out environment training activities for companies and public institutions. I can see that you're ready. Manuel, thank you so much. The floor is now yours.
Thanks to you. Thanks. It's an absolutely pleasure to be here and have the possibility to show you our biodiversity growth methodological program, because in fact it is a methodological program that tries to promote the biodiversity in field, but not only that, also to promote the development and the implementation of all of the 17 sustainable development goals, not only in the field, also in the packaging houses, because it's a methodological program that is structured as a certification, as you say before, as a standard that is integrated or is focused in general to the whole chain of value of the agri-food sector. It is it has been launched in 2019, and so we have already more than 5 years of experience in the field and in the in the sector in general, implementation the standard, and also we have more than 3,000 of hectares that are already into the program. So we are quite happy to say and to show some of the results about the implementation of this methodological program that is also focused in the continuous improvement. It's something, that's why we say methodological program. It's not something that is like an image or something that is more constant. It's more we do more than one visit in a year. So yeah, I would like to remark first of all the labor of a quality advisor in this sense. We are a consultancy with also more than 20 years of experience implementing different types of standards. Some of them you say before, Claudia, like IFS, BRC, ISO standards. All of them are related to the quality and food safety and environment standards, let's say, no? And the different sectors that we apply is the distribution, logistics, packaging, but above all, the horticultural sector. And with all of this knowledge, we have created BiodiversityGrow to help the growers, the producers, and also all of the companies that are into our sector to implement a new sustainability path in the way of working in the day-to-day. Well, BiodiversityGrow currently is working also, and it belongs to the working group organized by Hablando Alliance for claims in supply chains, and also it belongs to the technical committee of Global Gap as an expert in sustainability and biodiversity standards. As you know, Global Gap is one of the main standards in the field that growers are using. So we are helping them to develop the next solution regarding sustainability in the field. And also we help in the Food for Biodiversity Alliance, which is like it's a foundation with non-profit that is no non-profit organization where we can share knowledge and share also the newest things that are coming up in the sector, and also we try to anticipate to the new legal requirements that are coming for producers and also to packaging houses. So as you can see, we are seated next to some of the main standard committees, but also with some retailers like Lidl, Kaufland, or Edeka. So for us, it's quite important to have this, let's say, this area where we can improve as well our own standard. So what is exactly BiodiversityGrow? Well, as I said before, it's a methodological program for sustainable production and packaging. It was developed together with Quality and Advisor and the Polytechnic University of Valencia, where I've studied, and currently is exclusively certified by SGS, the certification body. But we say that it's a brand with main purpose. We are firmly committed with a product, with a final product that forests or promotes the biodiversity and the functional fauna, as our colleague Gonçalo said before, against the use of the application of pesticides, because we think that is a product that at the end for the final consumer is so much better in order to be more aligned to the 2030 agenda of the United Nations, but above all, in order to have a final product that is more respectful with our atmosphere, with that is fighting against the climate change, and also with the drought, with the depletion of natural resources such as the water. We not work only on the biodiversity. We also measure with a set of indicators how the companies work on every sustainable development goal with different measures, with different indicators. But our main purposes in the program are these: sustainability, biodiversity, pesticide reduction, human health, and fight against the climate change. BiodiversityGrow is at the end a product that is between the conventional product and the ecological product. I think we try to force a change on the model on the production model of the growers by forcing them to produce in another way. But for us, it's quite important to remark that at the end, we are changing the practices, but maintaining the level of the yield, the level of the performance in the production of the growers. This is quite important, as well as, of course, to remark that they are still respecting all the quality standards and food safety standards that are, of course, fundamental to commercialize this kind of products. So, which are the phases of the program? We have 3 different phases. The first one, we make a visit to the field. We collect some farm information. We evaluate the way as they are working in the field. We make a report and some management proposals in order to make with them some objectives and prepare some strategies to change the way as they are producing the products, the different products, horticultural products. Then there is a training. We propose, we accompany the producers in all this path together with the Polytechnical University of Valencia. And then we propose also some technological resources that can help them in order to set and of course to improve in this way in the field. And then there is a second visit, let's say in the same year, but 6 months later, more or less. So we can see, we can collect once again the information that we need. We evaluate the same things that we evaluate at the first visit, but also how they implemented those strategies that we proposed to them and the effectiveness of them. So we make a second report and we evaluate together with the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. That means with different things that are not only based in the way as they manage with the biodiversity in the field. And of course, if they have packaging houses, there is like a phase that we say is quite similar to chain of custody of some type of products, some standards of chain of custody, as for example, Global Gap. So we measure different indicators regarding the sustainability in the packing houses as well. So at the end, what we bring to the producer and to the companies that are working in the agri-food sector or in the horticultural sector, it's a product, a final product that they can communicate to the final consumer with with a use of a standard that is firmly committed with the sustainability, not only in the field, also in the whole chain of value. But we are talking about bioindicators today, no? This was like a sort of introduction, but which kind of bioindicators we measure normally in the field? Well, for example, the percentage of beneficial plants species as hosts for useful fauna on crops, the percentage of vegetation cover, and the amount of species that they have. Of course, particularly those that are more important in order to have a successful in the production, the soil structure and the fertility, the EIQ analysis, the environmental impact ratio, the reduction of water consumption, and also the reduction of the carbon emissions. And all of this is it's a bit complicated because it's like a complex tissue that is accompanied also with some technologies that we use, like satellite imaging systems, to evidence the results and also the perform that the growers are making in the field. Because for us, we measure with different indicators, not only one. They are not independent, and that's why I say that is like a complex tissue, because it's an integrated system. So, and it's something that the growers are happy with this, because our standard homologates first the field with the different standards that they already have related to quality or environment systems. These are, for example, one of the fields that we have been working on. The program has a minimum of 3 years baseline. So this is, for example, the different moments, the different pictures of a field that in the 2020 has no plant cover because of the removal of vegetation, and that is the main cause of the soil degradation. For then there is further erosion, lower biodiversity, less water retention, and less carbon sequestration. In 2021, it changed a bit, improves the organic matter in drip line. There is an average increase of 0.7% of organic matter. There is a little bit of water retention, and also starts to have a fixed carbon. Between 2021 and 2022, in the process planting, the total area under the scope of the BiodiversityGrow certification is planted. We can visually directly see different fauna in the cover, and also, of course, indeed there is evapotranspiration reduction, less erosion, greater biodiversity, and of course more fixed carbon. And in the 2022, there is a maintenance and optimization of the green cover. So with these steps, we try to get an optimal system that at the end provide us a lot of types of benefits, not only in cost, but also in the sustainability, in this sustainability path that we are trying to go on. This is an example of the use of the logo in one of the productions, one of the products that a company has in BiodiversityGrow. They can use the logo, and of course the final consumer can have a traceability of the product that they are consuming, which it means better transparency in the whole food of chain. These are some of our current producers. There are quite more, but these are one of the mainly. And the good thing, to be honest, is that all of them has increased the amount of hectares year by year with BiodiversityGrow, which is something for us really important. These are some of our partners, of course, fundamental in the development of our work. And you have here some of the contacts that you can where you can have more information in order to our BiodiversityGrow standard. Thank you so much
Thank you, Manuel,
for your time.
Thank you for your presentation. It was a pleasure to hear, and it was a pleasure to learn more about your methodology. I will start with a couple of questions, if you don't mind,
Sure.
while our participants start to raise their questions. So, based on your methodology, do you think the methodology is equally suitable to any type of crop, or there are specific crops that are more aligned with the methodology that you developed?
No, it is true that we have been working about all in citrus and oranges and different types of oranges, but because we are set in the Valencian community, so we have natural. We are more in contact with them, with this kind of producers.
Yeah, of course.
But of course, is able to implement in different type of crops. There is no problem about that. Yeah.
Okay. Even I see more struggles for vegetables, for example.
Yeah. But it's also possible, of course.
Okay, good. Also, in your presentation, there was something that caught my attention. It is actually something that has been referred here in Portugal for some of the incentives to farmers. So you mentioned that you measure and you evaluate change, and I guess you mentioned you need a baseline of 3 years to see the progress. So what about a farmer or someone that already has good practices, or at least fairly good practice, so the likelihood of changes and increasing and improving over the baselines is much more reduced? Are they allowed to have the certification or not?
Yes, of course, yes. In fact, it would be something that it would be really nice for us to see, because normally we have the situation that there is no of these kind of practices are implemented in the field. But if, of course, if we have this kind of situation, it would be so much easier for them to get the certification. Of course, we have different levels in order to provide our certification. So there is an initial level, an improvement level, and an advanced level. So we, together with the biodiversity indicators and the different indicators of the sustainable development goals, we set one of these levels to the producer or to the packaging house, or, for example, the broker that is commercializing the products at the end.
Okay, because this is important, because if we are just measuring the improvement, like for example in carbon sequestration, that can actually be penalizing the ones that are already doing good practice. So thank you for the clarification. Also, just to know a little bit more about certification. Certification, as always, is a double-sided coin. It's more work, it's more costs. It's a nightmare sometimes, bureaucracy, and if you cannot see the benefits, if they are not very clear, why should we go for another label? So my question here. How does biodiversity grow translate into benefit? Is it because of higher prices? Is it because more access to new markets, like, for example, new distribution chains? Is it because you can show there is some improvement in terms of crop yield? Can you elaborate a little bit more based on the use cases that you have?
Absolutely. Well, there are different facts, of course, but without any doubts, BiodiversityGrow, as I say before, more than a standard, is a methodological program. That's why I insist on that, because it's something that is focused in the continuous improvement. It works as a system, as an integrated system, and already accept different standards that are being implemented from the organizations, for example, in the field as Global Gap. Those main those fundamental standards are already, for us, are quite important in order to evaluate them or to accept them in an initial point into the standard. But above all, is a standard that integrates different things, different modules that normally we are talking about them independently. Like, for example, carbon footprint, zero waste in the agri-food sector, water footprint, leaf, etc., or SMETA regarding the social path. So what we do, we propose an integrated standard, an integrated system, which allows to the organizations at the end to report the way as they are working in the different levels of the, for example, ESG area, let's say, no? That's why it's also quite important, BiodiversityGrow, because it allows to the organizations to, for example, report their information regarding these three areas. For example, we have in Spain, probably you also have in Portugal, legislation which makes to the organization, ask for to the organizations to report this information. So BiodiversityGrow allows to have already organized all of those indicators and all of those all of that information that they need to report to the legal administration, to the institutions, and the rest of the stakeholders, of course, not only the institutions.
Okay. So actually, that's quite a lot of demand coming from the policy level. Unfortunately, this has not been able to be, well, apparently translated to consumers and, share the price of biodiversity conservation amongst the entire society, and not only on farmers. But well, it's always good to know that there are standards and methodologies to promote biodiversity. Manuel, thank you so much for your presentation. If we have questions later on, I will address them to you. It was great to hear you. I will now call Rui Figueira to the floor. Rui, let me just briefly introduce Rui. He's actually an assistant professor at Instituto Superior de Agronomia. He has a PhD in biology, where he developed studies on monitoring air and water pollution using biomonitors. In recent years, Rui has developed research in biodiversity informatics, agrobiodiversity, biogeography, and biodiversity and conservation. He's also the Portuguese node manager of the Global Biodiversity Information Facility. He has experience in national and international training and capacity building in biodiversity informatics. He's also the coordinator of the master program Green Data Science, which was recently launched by ISA, where he also teaches data science. Rui, many thanks for being here. Looking forward to hear your presentation.
Thank you, Claudia, for this nice presentation and for inviting for this very interesting series of webinars that I didn't know previously. So I'm very glad to be here. I'll be talking today about what is the fundamental things that we use to support all of these studies. So all data is important to the applications that we do on biodiversity, functional biodiversity. So we will go through a very brief on biodiversity indicators for functional biodiversity, then some specific example, and then what's the requirements on data and how can we work together to organize and make this data available as a community. So if working on biodiversity, we are normally concerned about species diversity, genetics diversity, also ecosystem diversity. But when thinking on functional biodiversity, we are also thinking on the traits, on the properties that species and the action of the species in the environment that will influence ecosystem dynamics, stability, productivity, nutrient balance, and other factors that result from this interaction between species and the environment. So we are very interested on how these species interact with the environment. So the traits are the way we can identify these interactions and also measure that. And by measuring this, we will be able to create indicators, indices that we will use to measure this interaction between species and species in the environment. So how can we go and use these indices to help us to understand these interactions and the benefits for the use on the environment? So I will start by giving a specific example on a study that we've developed in Portugal. It was in the Tagus agriculture valley near Colga, where we were interested to check what is the role that birds can represent in the control of pests in crops. But for that, we wanted to see not only how birds can help in controlling pests created by or pests developed by insects, but we wanted to see if we change or we have a change in the habitats where these bird communities are, do we see the same ecosystem services in this pest control, or do we see changes that helps us to understand the change in habitat in relation to the services developed? So we looked at 4 different types of habitats. As control, we use woodlands, but we also had 3 other situations. We had areas near crop development that had ecological infrastructures like woodlands or roads, edges, or with trees. We also looked at other situations that we are close to that edges, to the trees, but we are in open fields, and then we are in the middle of open fields. And so for these different situations, we try to identify which bird species appear and how they create different bird communities. And from that, and then we looked at how they use how they feed on arthropods or insects, and what is the level of services provided by that. So in these different situations, we could look that depending on the habitat, we have different types of bird communities. We have guilds, so we can measure, in fact, how these guilds provide their service in pest control. And so we could see that for each of the different types of habitats, then we have different guilds, different species composition, and the way they use the environment for feeding is different. So in the end, we could see that in areas where we are near to edges, but still in open fields, we could identify a higher consumption of arthropods by the bird communities. And this was different than what we could see in areas that where birds essentially live on bird and trees and use the trees or edges, or even higher than when we are in open fields. So this highlights how really understanding these communities and how they relate with the environment is important to see what is the support that farmers can have in their own decisions. Showing this, we can say that, look, if a farmer decides to reserve part of their land to have three areas, edge areas, so green infrastructures, probably they will have more ecosystem services in control of pests. So that this is the kind of information that is important to have. And if we look at the details of the study, then we can see that we had very different types of data. And we need all of this to be able to develop the study. So we need to identify birds and the count of birds, how many individuals are in the area, the list of bird species, their traits, and by combining that counts with the species we can identify and the use of the ecosystem, we can identify different guilds of birds. Then we need habitat types to identify the type of landscape we are. We are in open areas or in tree areas. We also need to know what are the crops that are present in the landscape and the pests that pose threat to that crops. And for that, we also used the information provided by farmers. So we had a full list of potential pests, but then from the field, farmers confirmed that these pests were important or not. And then we also need to know which pests are preyed by the birds. So these are very different types of data. I'm showing here an image on the area, how many points of bird occurrences we have. So very different types of data. And this is possible to do, and we have done it for a specific site. But if we try to do this in many different areas to transfer to other regions, is it possible to get all of this information? So this is the challenge that we face. So how can we rely on different data sources and aggregate that in a interoperable way to ensure the possibility of doing this kind of analysis? So the Bio Manifesto is a proposal that helps us to organize different sources of data and combine them in a way that makes it possible to do this type of analysis. And the Manifesto was a proposal based on the essential biodiversity variables that help to identify not only diversity of species, but also communities of species, abundance, services to the ecosystem. And so that's a proposal that exists. And in this other study, we have made a contribution to how can we organize all of this data in an interoperable way. So the goals of the study was to, listed here, was essentially to make sure that being that data available, that can be combined and used. So that relies in a series of principles that were proposed in this Manifesto framework. And that goes through 10 principles. One is that we should support our studies and our data mobilization on data management plans that defines the conditions, how data is made available and used and also archived for future purposes. We also should rely on data structure that defines different types of data, different domains, and the relation to other data sources that will support time, space, taxonomy, types of data. We should have complete description of the data through metadata that enables anyone to understand what is the data, how it can be used, what is the fit for use for specific purposes. We should apply principles of data quality. Of course, we should make data available through services that enable access to data in the most possible, easiest way, in standardized application programming interfaces. We should ensure workflows that enable anyone to understand what is the process from data mobilization until to data use and can be applied in repeated ways in the repeated situations. We should also ensure the provenance, identifying always the source of data, and that helps also to provide credit so the data providers are acknowledged in their effort. We should support this with ontologies and vocabularies to promote standardization of data and use of data, enable data preservation so that we ensure that in the future, even for uses that we didn't preview at first, that data can be used, there will be opportunities for that. So we should ensure the data preservation and we should ensure the accessibility of data. Accessibility means that anyone that needs that data and tries to find it, they will find it. So the FAIR principles are a key word for this accessibility. So with these principles, we have the framework so that if for repeating that study, I need to do that in another area, I will have access to that data with all the effort that is needed. So this is an example and how of an initiative that can support this. The Global Biodiversity Information Facility is a global organization made by governments that ensures that anyone with a browser in anywhere in the world can have access of all of this data for free. And this is now 2.6 billion records. And 2.6 billion records, it is really a humankind effort because know that for each of these points, we had someone doing the record or documenting that and identifying the occurrence of a species in this point. So at each of these points. So it is a huge effort. And what it serves for? Well, the best benefit of GeoEffect because it aggregates data that is coming from all over the world. So for example, for this Asian hornet that has been a concern here in Portugal, we can see through GeoEffect that the evolution of the distribution of the species in Europe can be easily just seen by the records, the historic records we have through time in the continent. So this is the kind of things, and then because the aggregation of data is of high levels, then it can support also global assessments like the ones done by the International Panel for Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services. Then in 2009 made these previews of their report, the fifth report, where then, well, we saw that the dynamics of the biodiversity was in concerning problems. So GBIF, of course, is supporting a lot of research. So we can see the number of papers. But in fact, what is happening here? It's happening a workflow that GBIF facilitates. It doesn't own data, but it facilitates data that is coming from producers and being used by users. So who creates the data? Who is the provider, the institution provided? Well, that comes from museums to universities, national agencies, the private sector. So we have companies that publish data for free using GBIF workflow, and that data goes well. And then a very important area is the citizen science. So we have a lot of records that are provided by citizens that observe and provide data. And that's on specimens that come from biological collections, from environmental DNA, observations, literature, remote sensing. That data is organized to standards, and then the central part of infrastructure is that making sure that the data becomes available to anyone, and anyone means researchers and support of decision making, supporting all development of policies in all of these different areas, being researchers that work in ecology, in food security, conservation, human health, all of this, but also global organizations like the United Nations programs like conservation, the CBD, ACBES that I mentioned, the World Health Organization, FAO, all of these are using data provided through GBIF. So that records essential are this, are documenting what we call primary biodiversity data. Which species where, when it was seen, by who, and in which habitat conditions. So, but it's not an easy task to make sure that this data is available to everyone and everyone can understand. That requires a standardization. So the Darwin is the standard that is more used through the GBIF community, meaning institutions that publish data. That's about 2,000 institutions all over the world that organize and publish their data using a standard. The Darwin Core standard, and the Darwin Core standard is simply a list of terms or columns in your table that are well defined with a specific concept, with some recommendations, with control vocabulary, all that anyone can understand and use to organize the data. And if I publish my dataset here in Portugal, anyone in Japan can understand and doesn't need to contact me to ask, what is this? So it is organized. And this goes through this Biodiversity Information Standards International Organization that regulates the development of the data model, the standard. But Darwin has been some limitation, especially to support fully the requirements of the essential biodiversity variables. So in GBIF, we are developing a new data model that will support a much broader set of variables, not only on biodiversity, but also in the physics and the environment associated to biodiversity. So based on the several use cases, we have developed this model, and that results in the collaboration of many organizations and projects where GBIF plays an essential role. And because of GBIF is playing this role, somehow the community asked, give us some guidance. So the development of the Alliance for Biodiversity Knowledge created this framework that tries to organize common principles that anyone can attach and collaborate, because none of these organizations can do all of the work. So we need to agree in common standards and frameworks to make sure that the data that are created can be used by others and the other way around. So through this Alliance for Biodiversity Knowledge, the whole community in biodiversity informatics is agreeing on common principles to make sure that these different parts combine together to provide the data in a free and open way to everyone. So this is essentially what I was trying to present you as this workflow from data to use. Thank you very much.
Rui, thank you so much for a great presentation, and really timely with the example that you just brought from Golga. We had a question about Ribatejo addressed to Gonçalo. So now you bring the example of Golga. It was really, really interesting, and thanks also for showing the database. And I invite everyone to jump into the database and to find what are the species that you have in your local area, get to know more about your area and the sort of animals and insects and all sorts of species that live in your area. So I think it's also a very interesting tool for the civil society. So thanks for bringing that to our knowledge. I have here a couple of questions, but let me turn first to our participants. So we have a question here. What developments do you anticipate in the near future in terms of biodiversity data?
Well, I would say that what we will see now is that more and more there is a willing of organizations, even individuals, but also companies to share data. This initiative is already well established through research domain, but it is growing to others, because what we saw is that combining data provides a lot of beneficial results in support of decision, but everyone understands that cannot produce all of the data. So if the value of having data combined, for example, we document occurrences, species occurrences, but we cannot document all of the traits of these species. So we need to rely on databases that document the traits. And only combining that, we will then go to the next step, which is, can we use this to access the services that these species are doing in the ecosystem? So these developments are really occurring based on the standardization of data, and that's a key step in all of this, which is agreeing on common standards for each of the fields. It can be on agronomy, or it can be on biodiversity, can be on health. Standards are a key way of organizing your data so that others can understand and apply to their necessities.
No, good. Rui, another question. There are some citizens wanting to take part in your platform. The question is, how can citizens help to increase this data?
Well, this has been huge. In fact, from that 2.6 billion records that you saw is available through GBIF, more than half of that is coming from citizen science initiatives. Well, one of the biggest one there is eBird. eBird is a community for bird watchers. It is very well established globally. So
very big in the UK. It's a huge activity.
UK, all over the world, in Portugal. Just taking data coming from eBird, we can say that we have all grids in Portugal covered with bird counts. So that's really amazing. But the nicest thing is that experience in eBird for bird watchers, which are a very dynamic community, is spreading to all over other biological groups. So, for example, in Portugal, we have a very, I would say, already rolled by a citizen science initiative called Biodiversity for All, which they partnered in Portugal with the global initiative iNaturalist, which is a very simple organization that you can be very active in sharing data. They provide you with a mobile app. You can go to the field, you take pictures of something you want to document and share with others. That picture can be even if you don't know how to identify a plant or a bird or insect even, there are suggestions based on tools of artificial intelligence that give you a first identification of what you saw. So you report that together with the coordinates, which is embedded in the GPS of your mobile phone, the date, the place, your name as a user, and it's shared through iNaturalist. And the nice thing is that the rest of the community in iNaturalist can identify or confirm your record. So in that way, you are working in a community that collaborate in making that data available, also validating data, which is very important. And all of that goes through GBIF as well. So we can combine that data with data published by researchers or by companies. You know that
Rui, we need to promote one of those trips, one of those field days where we go and check biodiversity. We have the app and we learn how to identify and to interact more with nature. That would be really an amazing activity. So I leave here open this idea. Eventually we can materialize that in one day. Just because we are running really short, and I will now open the floor also to the rest of our speakers. And I will start with you. Rui, you mentioned a lot about data, but one of the main questions, and you probably know that here at Food for Sustainability, we have a Horizon Europe project that is called the BioMonitor. And one of the main issues that is emerging from this project is the need to well define the biodiversity indicators, how they can be used to inform policy. So one of the questions is actually more important than to have a lot, is to have biodiversity specifically to certain soil functions and pest control. So how you see this panorama, this landscape in terms of Europe? Are we really there? Do we really have these biodiversity indicators? Are they standardized? Can we use them to define policies?
I would say no. We are in the process. There are a lot of studies, but from a specific study to a generalization, that's a big step. And that is not really the status we are already. Let me give you an example. The study that we presented for Gauguin, we tried to generalize that only based on web accessible data. So that's a study that is running now. We tried that in the California Agricultural Valley. We were able to be reproducing that only based on web data, web available data. But that required a huge work, and we could only do that with birds, because we know that we have a lot of data for bird occurrences. We had data about the crop mapping, and that can be done in the California Valley. They are doing that based on remote sensing. If I try to do that in Portugal, globally, in the whole country, then it's difficult. So this step from indicators that result from a specific study to a generalization, I don't think we are still there. And I don't think that the requirements that Europe is bringing on the application of the new PAC, etc., that requires this kind of tools. if we are prepared for that, I don't think so.
Okay, not yet. Okay, so we still need to find, something that can be standardized and used across the board, at least in Europe. Okay, at least for Europe would be good. Gonçalo, Manuel, your views on the type of bioindicators and the need to compare and to make sure that we have a measure that we can build and actually act on biodiversity. Yes, go ahead, Manuel.
Well, our all, as you say before, with the monitoring, for us, with the monitoring, for us is the most important thing in order to improve the way as we work on the field and in the different steps in the chain of value of the agri-food sector. So as we say, it's quite important to measure and to have all of these data and to have the access and to share and with different stakeholders, and about all to have a focus on the continuous improvement when we are talking about these indicators. It's not only something that we do for instance, but it's only that we have to improve year by year in order to implement new objectives, to be ambitious, and in order, of course, to don't make any step forward, as we are seeing currently in the news with the current situation that there is in the agricultural sector. Of course, it's complicated. It's a complicated dilemma to talk about this in the webinar, but I think it's quite important to fight against this problem. Because it's gonna determine the rest of the coming years.
Okay, good. So we need some measures. Gonçalo, Koppert, it's over 60 years. So have you managed to use some more standardized biodiversity indicators? What are your views?
No, we don't really use biodiversity indicators in a standardized way. What we do is we tend to follow, in some projects we are involved, we tend to follow what others have developed. What I personally think is that we need to use those tools to, even in our day-to-day activity in biological control, because when we are following farmers, we need to show them exactly what they have, how things improve over time, and because that also means more money to them, more economic value.
Yes, that's, and I would say that I would just add, this is one of the challenges with agriculture, is that it's very difficult to find one single recipe that fits everyone. And this is why we keep these discussions and we don't have a straight answer that easily, is because this needs to be a tool that can at the same time be adjusted and adapted to every single situation. But, if Europe wants to legislate in terms of the outcomes of biodiversity, they need to be able to measure it, and they need to have a set of indicators that can be useful for farmers to, at least as the guidance and as a reference. Well, I think we have reached the time of our webinar. I have to say it was a real pleasure again to have you here to discuss this lovely and such important topic. So thank you very much for all the participants to be here. Thank you so much for our distinguished speakers. I hope you have enjoyed these moments with us. Hopefully you can join us next week. Next week we will continue with our topic, but we will be more focusing on the impact of biodiversity loss in the agriculture sector. So I now call this webinar to the end. I wish you a rest of a pleasant evening and hope to see you again next week. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
A nice evening.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.